Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salalo Makwili. The time is 10 minutes to the top of the hour 9, and we're going to be shifting gears now and turning our attention or spotlight to Africa's geopolitical crossroads. At a time when global power dynamics feel like they're shifting and long-standing assumptions about development, about sovereignty and influence are being challenged, there's a conversation that's being had, and that conversation is around Africa's relationship with China, from infrastructure, trade to BRICS expansion, and just global governance, and the nature of Africa's relationship with China, our dwindling relationship with the United States, well, at least this administration of the United States, and just the West generally, and how will that shape the continent's economic and political trajectory for decades to come? The critical question is, can Africa engage with China and other global partners without repeating the imbalance of the past? The people to people exchanges that we've had with China as a continent, as a country, South Africa, is that the future? And are the foundations of that relationship set to see us, I don't know, shift from the hostility from the United States of America under Trump's influence, and how would that affect Africa's strategic choices? And most importantly, what must South Africa and the continent do to secure genuine autonomy and prosperity, while also building relationships and multilateral engagements with countries like China? Recent reports of suggesting that a new chapter in China and Africa civilization dialogue, in people-to-people exchanges and cooperation in infrastructure, technology, and trade, with very, very deep historical roots. And to explore these issues, we're joined by Ashraf Patel, Senior Research Associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue at UNISA, and he brings with him deep insight into Africa's geopolitical strategy and economic diplomacy and the relationship that we have with China. Ashraf, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media.
Good morning, Salilo and team and listeners. Wishing all well for the new year. It's already a quarter of a century into the century, so very interesting times ahead, as the Chinese saying goes.
No, most definitely. And I want to jump right into it. Africa has a very, very long history of external engagement, whether, it stems from colonialism to the post Cold War order. At this current moment, how should we interpret China's role in Africa, in light of this history, in light of the history of external engagement, and how does it differ or not from Western investment patterns that have been the order for such a long time on the African continent?
Yes. Remember, this comes in context of the launch of the China-Africa people-to-people dialogue exchanges that was launched yesterday at the Embassy of China by Ambassador Wu Peng, as well as the Director General of Tourism and the Minister of Youth and Persons with Disability. I think the context, of course, being the massive challenges of the right-wing Trump administration globally, that are cutting ties with the global South, that are re-establishing colonial condescending patterns with the global South. By contrast, the BRICS nations, China, they have outreach to Africa and the global South in terms of an equal partnership and mutual respect and international peace. These are the pillars that underpin the foreign policy of China, rooted in the foundations of civilizational dialogues. This is so important, as the world, as we see today, is a world of gangsterism, the world of rogue states such as the US, that with impunity can just take over sovereign nations, kidnap leaders of sovereign nations, I think it's a sign of deep desperation of the US that they need to resort to that purely because they could not master the game of globalization. And so, with the launch of the China Africa people to people dialogue, we see real globalization. It is
mm,
about people to people exchange, celebrating equally our different cultures within sports, within culture, within education. This is what globalization is all about. And this is what China Africa relations, BRICS Africa relations is all about. And I think that is the message of the launch of the China Africa people to people exchange yesterday.
most definitely. Um, One thing that I think everyone is starting to notice at this current moment is that China's engagement with the African continent um spans a lot of facets. From infrastructure, as you mentioned, people to people exchange, digital connectivity, health cooperation. It's a lot. Um, but what would you say are some of the tangible benefits that Africa is seeing today, and where are the most critical risks that African policymakers must also guide against? Because we shouldn't, I think, from the lessons that we've learned with the West and the engagements that we've had with the West, there's always terms and conditions, and going blindly in some of these agreements has proven to be detrimental to the African continent.
Definitely. I mean, let us just look at the COVID era. During the COVID crisis, the US and Europe practiced COVID nationalism, and they made super profits out of Africa during the crisis. They hoarded the vaccines. By contrast, China and Russia donated vaccines, both the Sinovac and Sputnik vaccines, to many African nations. So, this is an example that the development model of the BRICS nations is about development cooperation in developing health systems, in developing digital trade that's more equal, in developing agricultural technology. And now, people to people, arts and culture and sports is an important pillar of civilizational dialogue. And this is what the message was yesterday, as we have seen, for instance, 50 students, Tibet students
Mm-hmm.
from South Africa, are now going to China for a 1 year course on e commerce. Now, this is groundbreaking. This is an example of skills development in an era where we have seen massive cuts in development aid in the West. So these are what we need to embrace the new global South cooperation. This is the future, and all is happening without any wars or conflicts. For
Mm,
instance, China has no conflict or invaded no country in the world over the last 75 years. And today it is an economic superpower because it channels its resources into trade, manufacturing, development, education, and science. And by contrast, most of the US budgets are going into military and oil. So it's disbanded. So I think there is a complete new global development initiative, the GDI, that was launched by China, the Global Governance Initiative launched by China 2 years ago by President Xi, the BRICS nations that are launching the green digital industrialization dialogues, as well as the vaccine pandemic
mm,
platforms that will allow global South countries to co develop new vaccines with the BRICS nations. Now, this is what is called real development, not the pseudo extractive development of the West. So, there's a different pathway for Africa and the global South. And I think it's good news for
mm.
Africa and the global South as we strengthen relations with BRICS nations and China.
Most definitely. I want to focus on South Africa specifically. China is our BRICS partner. We enjoy, I think, very very healthy bilateral relations with China. BRICS and the BRICS Plus are expanding. I think it was just late last week, with those naval exercises that are currently underway in Cape Town, and new partnerships that are forming. For South Africa, a relationship with China, what does it mean strategically in terms of positioning ourselves, between the United States, China, and Russia, and looking at the the relationship that we have with the US right now, which feels like is probably at its worst than it has ever been in recent history.
Yes, it's nothing. It's not a big deal because the naval exercises happens annually with China and Russia, and these been happening every year for the last 6 years. It was no issue. It's now being amplified purely because the US is now kind of in a war mode. So it's now putting severe pressure on BRICS nations and South Africa and others. So, it is something that is what is called a storm in a teacup. And these naval exercises, and even if you just read, the theme of the naval exercises is called Will for Peace.
Mm,
So, what does it talk? It's about protecting territorial boundaries, maritime, sovereign pathways for Southern Africa in the world of trade. It's about protecting coastlines. It is about protecting the oceans and the fisheries. So this is normal. All nations in every part of the world with their partners conduct such exercises, and it's the norm. So it is now being blown out of proportion, and I think that it will soon pass over. It's not a big deal, but of course the Trump administration is unhappy with South Africa because we have taken progressive positions at the United Nations, at the international courts
mm,
of justice, in global trade forums. We are articulating for a fair multilateralism, and that rattles the entrenched powers of the West. In short, in summary, South Africa is a responsible sovereign nation. We have many mistakes, our mistakes. There are shortcomings, but balance. South Africa is progressive, is human righted, it is developmental in terms of trying to develop new models of governance. It has massive challenges in terms of skills, but we are on a pathway to a better future, despite all the challenges that we face. It is quite sad that there is right-wing nationalist movements in South Africa. There are race-based politics that are trying to divide the nation, and this is quite tragic. And progressives and civil society should contest these right-wing narratives because we are a constitutional democracy under one nation, sovereign. And I think
mm,
should be the message. And nations like China, through especially trade, investment, skills, science, and culture, are strengthening South Africa. And we are taking common positions at the United Nations on all matters, from climate change. China is leader in climate technologies. It is by far the number one investor in climate change technologies, from solar to wind to every technology on the planet. And it's making that available at an affordable rate to global South nations. That's another example of responsible development. Yes, there are
mm,
challenges, there are imbalances in trade, and we need to confront that, and there are mechanisms to address that. But on balance, this is about people to people civilizational dialogue in a world where the Western nations have gone rogue. The Western nations have increased military expenditure. Western nations allowed a genocide in Gaza to continue, and yet they proclaim that they created the United Nations Charter. So they in violation of the same charter that they co-created at the end of World War II. So these are the deep contradictions. In summary, I think the US especially is completely jealous about the China's economic rise in trade, in technology. If you look at the auto sector, China is now the leader in auto in every sector and segment. And that is because they have a successful industrial strategy that they've implemented well. Whereas in the West, their market-based strategies are failing. The inequality is increasing. So it's not China's fault that the West is failing. They are succeeding and they are playing by the rules. So
mm,
why
mm,
does the US have a problem with that? It's what is called xenophobia or xenojealousy. And I think it's quite tragic that they created the World Trade Organization. Nations
mm,
like China have mastered the World Trade Organization, and we can only learn from that. And I think the West now needs to be humble that they have kind of undermined the multilateral system, and that's creating chaos in the world. Whereas the BRICS nations is trying to address that through new global governance initiatives. So I think with people-to-people dialogue is a key pillar that China is promoting with Africa, especially in the field of sports, in the field of culture, cultural exchanges. For instance, martial arts is a discipline that many of us in Africa can benefit from because it takes one away from the bad elements in society and communities. It gives one focus. Um, it is an art, but it is also about health. It is about meditation. Similarly, yoga and other
mm,
sports from the East. Africa has its own cultural sports. All of this is about people to people learning on equal platforms. And I think this is the future. BRICS is the future. And under leadership of China and the BRICS nations, the global south is standing its ground in the world order today. And that came through decades of proper development between Africa and China and BRICS nations that are beginning to ask, rightfully so, for better rules and new rules in a world that is going rogue.
mm, mm. Finally, Ashraf, before I let you go, just looking ahead 5 to 10 years from now, if you can just look at your crystal ball, what would you say are some of the realistic outcomes that should Africa aim for in its engagement with China, the relationship we have with the United States and the global system, and what would you say are the most actionable steps to get there?
Yes, I mean, let us look. Africa US relations are at an all time low. All development aid has been cut. There's no flow of resources from the north. Today, the US Congress has to vote on AGOA again. If we lose our AGOA status, we lose enormous economic potential. Why is AGOA being instrumentalized against Africa? Whereas, by contrast, China has offered duty free access to 53 African nations into the massive Chinese market. That can spur industrialization of Africa as well as growth of Africa. So I think we need to move into reality and honesty. You look at the data, the BRICS nations and China offers Africa far better developmental deal. Yes, there are imbalances, but that is being addressed. By contrast, the nations of the West and the G7, their relations with Africa is extractive and also imbalanced. And yes, there are some complications with BRICS nations, but it is at a better level. We will try and find better models so Africa benefits. But people to people relations are essential. And I think that is the message from the Africa China people to people event dialogue launch that was held yesterday. And it can only be good news for South Africa as it faces the wrath of the US and other right wing nations.
Well, there you have it, Ashraf Patel. Thank you so much for joining us and for unpacking the complex dynamics that shaping Africa's engagement with China, BRICS, and the West. Always a pleasure and hope we chat again soon.
Shukran. Thank you for having me.
And with that, we're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we'll be shifting to another interesting and very, very important conversation. We'll be talking about Guantanamo Bay, still open 24 years. We'll be unpacking the human cost of Guantanamo with Guantanamo Bay expert, investigative journalist, activist, and author Andy Worthington, who'll be joining us right after the break.